Cool.
Okay, well, it is 8 o'clock, and so we'll kick this thing off. Um, I think at some point in this podcast type format, we'll talk about how Andrew and I met and some of deals along that whole line. But the reason that I'm having Andrew on here on this call is because he took his CWI training and test within the last couple of years,
Yeah,
something
it
like
was
that.
2021.
Okay, and you went to one of Lincoln's training programs and then took the test after that.
Yep.
And so I don't think anything has probably changed since then. It's pretty fresh in your mind and everything. It's still parts of when I took it are fresh in my mind, but I go back to like 1990-ish in that time frame, so that's all I can speak to, except for the updating and the re-upping and the renewing and all that stuff that, I did since then. But this is about taking the American Welding Society certified welding inspector exam and any training that goes along with it. And we're going to talk about some tips for passing that, as well as things to look out for, tips and tricks, study guides, tabbing your code book, things like that. And so, well, what the heck? Well, I don't know if everybody on here knows who you are, Andrew, so I'll give you a little quick introduction. You can fill in the gaps. Andrew competed in the 2015 World Skills Competition, placed 5th. Since then, he has gone on to work several pipe jobs. He worked for Lincoln Electric in the training center, and now he is working in gas distribution for a company called Nuco, and he's in the role of a supervisor. And so all that sort of necessitated him getting his CWI credential. And that's really the gist of it. You can fill in any gaps that you want, Andrew.
I think you covered it all. I don't want to bore people to death with all the things. So,
okay. And I'll talk, personally, I got my CWI. What happened to me was I got so lucky, so blessed, so whatever you want to call it, put in the right place at the right time. I mean, it just blows my mind. I went to work with Delta Airlines, and within months, I got tapped on the shoulder to run the training and certification program. And with that, I knew that, geez, this is a pretty big responsibility. I need something. And I read about the possibility of getting the CWI, and I thought, I need to get that if that's a thing. And so I signed up, I took it. And that was around the late 90 or early 91 timeframe. I don't really remember exactly. And so I never worked really, did contract CWI work or everything, but I got it. I got my CWI credential to shore up what I did there working for a major airline. And so I'll talk about some stories about that later on. But so some questions that I think everybody wants to know. First of all, I guess, what is a CWI? Why would you want to get it? Who needs to get it? What kind of doors it can open up for you? Is it worth it? Is it worth the cost? Should you take the training? Should you take the physical training or online training? Things like that, So let's just start. What made you get yours, Andrew?
well, very similar to, I don't want to reemphasize too much what you were talking about, but everything in my welding career, I've been welding for 15 years. Started in high school back in 2008, November of 2008. So actually this November was 15 total years of me being in the welding industry. And everything that I've done up until and past getting my CWI has necessitated, it's always pushed me towards getting that. As we all know, everything across the board, no matter what it is, everything's getting more and more difficult. The welding industry has changed a lot. Just about every industry has changed. I don't need to go into all the things that have changed in this world in just a very short time, but it seems as though the more education you have, just the better off you're going to be from a number of standpoints. Number one, when you're trying to, and I'll go, JD's on, so this is perfect because I remember his podcast way back in the day when you guys are first starting out your welding tips and tricks podcast, and he said you always want options when he was talking about, his 210 MP, and he was saying you have to have options. That is probably the biggest thing for me getting my CWI was just the option. Do I want to be CWI full time? No. I don't. That's not one of my desires. I still like welding. I still like having my shoulder to the holder. But with that being said, anything that you have attached to that welding, any letters that you have behind your name, any other education that, gives you some type of certificate that's recognized as being a CWI, it's world renowned. So no matter where you go in the world, if you have an AWS CWI, that's going to be recognized by somebody. So I know that you said that there's some listeners on right now that are from a different part of the world. That's, it just gives you options. That's one big thing. Number two is I find that more and more people are going for their CWI and they don't have any type of welding background, which part of what I was going to get into going into this conversation was going through the process. And that's what we had originally talked about, is going through the process of getting your CWI. What does it take? Well, if you pull up the AWS's requirements for documentation for work that you're in, the line of work that you're in, how long you've been in the welding industry, it actually says that you don't have to have any welding experience. You can have X amount of years, if you quit school in eighth grade, you have to have X amount of years in a welding related industry, but you don't have to be a welder. And really, you don't even have to be my safety guy at my company has nothing to do with welding. But because he's in the gas distribution industry and he's been in it for the past 20 years, he can go and apply for his CWI. I see more and more of that. I see more and more people thinking, oh, it's another option for me to be able to make more money because CWIs make a lot of money. They go, they study for the test, and they go and take the test, and they don't know anything about welding. Now they're telling someone like myself or you who have been in the industry, actually welded, know metallurgy, know the welding process, and then they're the ones telling you what to do. And most oftentimes I find that they start making up their own rules to compensate for what they don't know, what they're not comfortable with. So that's another reason why I got it. And then of course, just having a better knowledge of all the pieces and parts that go into what you're welding. It's one thing to be a welder that just welds hands-on every single day. That takes a certain skill set and a certain mindset to be able to do that type of work. And you can be great at it. And I know plenty of guys that are way smarter than me, and that's all they've ever done. But when you start getting into more of the code work, which I'm involved with every single day, when you add a piece of that, whether it's going to get your CWI, whether it's going to get your AS&T certification, whether it's going to get your NACE certification for how they, coat the pipe afterwards, or you get a an X-ray tech cert of some kind, or and any type of NDT, whether it's dye penetrator testing or mag particle, anything along those lines. Now you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So now it actually makes you a better welder. And I try to explain that to people is like every time I go for something more, it makes me a better welder because I know the step that comes after me. I might know the step that comes before me. So I know how important my piece is when it comes to a good example of that is I know what a weld appearance will look like on film because I've looked at enough X-ray film. I'm not the type of guy I'll weld something. I think it looks fine. X-ray comes back and is like, well, it looks this way. And the level three NDT guy, the level three tech who's going to okay all the film, he could fail it because it looks a certain way on film. I know it doesn't look that way when I field verify it, but the film, he's only going to see the film. So I've had enough of those experiences where I'm like, okay, now I know what this is going to look like on film. I try to avoid whatever that particular look is. Kind of on topic, but in the same vein, I know what the CWI is looking for after I'm done welding it or while during I'm welding it. So I try to make his job easier or her job easier. So that's another reason why I went and got it. Yeah, that kind of
Oh,
summarizes all the reasons why I
that's
went.
good. That's good. That's good. Laying a good ground, a good foundation here. So you went to the course they had at Lincoln Electric to prep for the CWI. Tell us a little bit about that and whether or not you would recommend that, or, well, I don't know if you have any other feedback from anybody else who went to a different prep course. I went to a different one, so I can at least give that perspective. But how did that go for you?
So I applied for my CWI, and you go online and kind of give those who are listening kind of an idea of how this all kicks off, because I had no idea how this even kicked off. When you go online, you just type in CWI certification, and there's a tab on the AWS page that'll say initial qualification or initial certification. I can't remember exactly the wording. Initial certification process. So when you click on that, it'll tell you, okay, again, repeating what I was saying before, the documents that you need. So you're going to need, your license, a license, proof of whatever, that you're a citizen of some place. For me, it was my driver's license, I believe. I had to have a passport style photo I had to send in. I have to have proof of my education, because there's different tiers. By the time I went and got my CWI, I had also had my bachelor's degree. I had been in the welding field already long enough because I went to a 4-year technical school. So I already had the credit hours in order to get my CWI before that. But I also put in for my bachelor's degree, which you only need 2 years of being in the field. And then, of course, all my background and all that. They want all that on file. And there's two different ways you can go about it. You can do this as a member. So you either sign up as an AWS membership, or you can do it as just like a sign up for free guest type of deal. When you do that, they charge you for it. So you get a discount for being a member. It's not really that much of a discount because they make you pay the membership for the year. So there's, that involved. But it's more expensive if you're not a member. You sign up for it, you request, I want to, take this course. Then there's different options. Do you want to just take the test? Do you want to just study on your own and go take the test? Do you want to take a 3-day Part B test? And we can talk a little bit about Part A, Part B, Part C. And then there's also a prep week, a 1-week prep week that they offer. So the way that I did it, to answer your original question, is I signed up for it. I signed up for the Lincoln school to go and do it. Now, all of these school dates, if you get the AWS journal, it'll tell you when the dates are that these weeks are going to be. And if you look on Lincoln's website, Real Education is another one. A couple of guys from work went through Real Education. They're down in Pascagoula, Mississippi. You can take the 1 week through them, and you can also do it online through Real Education. And then you can go to wherever the next CWI exam is going to be. They're all hosted all over the country. So you find the one that's closest to you. If you're not in a rush, you can wait it out and find one that's closest to your city, or you can fly and go to one, in California if you want to take it next week. The reason I went to Lincoln, a couple reasons. Number one, I had a place to stay. I lived there, so friends of mine are there. I stayed with a good friend of mine, Carl Hose. So I was there for 2 whole weeks, because the first week was the Lincoln course, the second week was the AWS course, and then I took the test on that Saturday following the AWS course. The nice part about the Lincoln course is Charlie Cross is the one who teaches the Lincoln course and the AWS course. So you have the same teacher 2 weeks in a row. It's in person, which I'm not a good online learner. I went through college online, and it was brutal. And also the time constraints I was under because of the industry that I'm in. The construction season is from, April 1st through the end of November, sometimes into December. I went and took mine right at the end, the last 2 weeks of September, and I tested my Part B on the 2nd of October. So it was right there. And then I came back, took my other 2 tests in Prometrics. But that all was because I had some place to stay. I knew the guy that was teaching it, Charlie Cross, and I know he does a fantastic job. I would highly recommend going to Lincoln if you want that experience, because Charlie has like an 85 or a 95%, I forget what his numbers were, pass rate for the people who take his class, then take the AWS class that he does, and then go and take the test. If you take those 2 weeks right in a row, you got a really good chance of passing. And that's kind of true. When I was there, the people who were in the the class with him, with me in the first week, we did a better job than the guys who did this just the second week, just the AWS class, because it's a dump of information. You have to know so
It's a
much.
sip from a fire hose. It really is.
Yes. Yep.
What would you say would be someone's chances of passing without taking any training?
Without taking any training, it's kind of hard to tell. I would hazard a guess that the numbers have stayed true from everybody I've talked to, you included. The numbers are like a 60% fail rate. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the way that the test is structured. Number one, it's like you said, it's taking all that information in from a fire hose. I mean, no matter how much you think you know about welding, you don't know anything. And it's not just the welding, it's also, and that's kind of what I was going to go through. When I first went into the class, one of the best tips I ever got when I first went into the class. Now you can take the test on a couple different books. You can take it on D11, you can take it on API. I believe looking on their website, you could even take like D1.2, which I believe is aluminum or stainless. You can take it on a number of different tests. The two most common are D11 and API 1104. People normally choose one of the two. It was just brought to, don't quote me on that. When I was looking at the website today, it said, code books you can take the test from, which I thought was pretty interesting because I only thought it was D11, which is a structural code. AWS D11 is the structural building code. And then there's API 1104, which is pipeline and transmission standard. When you go to the Lincoln class, different than real welding, real education, I should say, Charlie has you write everything down. He goes, okay, before we even, I didn't even crack open any of these books. I had been so busy working. We walked into class and he wrote down on a whiteboard on one side, he said, everybody taking D11, I want you to write down all the clauses 1 through 9, what they are. And then API 1104, there's 13 sections and 2 appendixes. I want you to write down what every single one is. I couldn't name any of them. I honestly couldn't. I hadn't even cracked open the book. So he's like, I want you to write them down. And then every single morning when we come in, you're going to, this is the same test every single morning. So every morning I came in, section 1, scope of what we're doing. Section 2, references. Section 3, terms and definitions. Section 4, I want to say it's something to do with, not qualifications because that's 5, but it's something leading up to qualifications. And that's every single morning you would memorize that. And then before you knew it, he said, you don't even need to tab your book because now you know where stuff is. That's 90% of taking part C. And
Yeah.
to kind of go over what this,
Part two
what's
is
that?
the open book, right?
Yep. So part A,
Just to clarify with everybody, when we
yes.
say it's either D1.1 or API, there's some other options, but those are the two most common. They were back in the day also. But there is part B or whatever is the open book code, and what that involves was, it is just what it says. It's open book. They ask you a bunch of questions, and you can look in the book, but it's timed, and it's pretty tight. And so the D11 is like an inch thick. The API is more like a 1/4 inch thick as far as number of pages. A lot of people opt for the API. I went for the D11 just because I was very freshly working out of that, welding structural pipe supports. And so I went, even though it was thicker, that was fresh in my mind. But you need to tab that sucker off because so many chapters, just to the time, so you can go right to procedure qualification or right to performance qualification and not waste any time. And if you do that and you know what you're doing, then it's enough. You have enough time to finish the test. But if you just go in there, if you roll out of bed and go in there and don't know anything and don't tab your book off, then you're not going to do it. It's not happening for you. Just that's my little insert there. I want to get that in there.
Yeah, I actually, that's a good point that you bring up. So there's 3 parts to the test. for anybody who's wondering what we're talking about when we say part A, part B, all that stuff. There's three parts to the test. Part A is all of the information. So I believe it's like 185 questions or 165 questions, all pertaining to, and it gives you percentages. Like they tell you all the percentages of like how many of those 186, 165 questions are NDT questions, non-destructive testing. How many are welding theory? How many are metallurgy? How many are welding process? All those things they have in the 165 questions. So they'll say, only 20% is going to be your NDT, and they'll give you that listing for a part A. Part B, that's the one that everybody stumbles on. That's the hands-on. That's the one that has a fake code book, which I have a, so to kind of give you guys an idea, not that you want to see my armpit, this is what you need to have to study. So I'll kind of go through some of these with you. So you'll get something like this. When you go through the AWS and you say, I want to take the AWS CWI course, they'll give you this book of specifications. This book of specifications is a fake code book. So it's not real. It's pulled from real code books, but it's not a real code book. It's designed specifically to show that you can work through any code book. So, for example, section 2.0 or clause 2.0, however they clause 2.0, that's structural steel. Clause and structural steel is labeled it looks almost exactly identical to a D11, but it's not the same as D11. They mimic it, but they make it so that if you know D11 by heart, you're going to get the questions wrong. You're going to get the answers wrong to the questions that they ask, because the tolerances that they give are either more or less than what the D11 code is. And they want to see that you can open this up and read what it is. Everybody in the world knows that, D11 says you have a maximum cap height on the bead appearance for a butt weld. You have the maximum height of a 1/4 inch. Well, if you open up this book, complete joint penetration, if you're less than or equal to 1 inch, max height is 1/16. So if I went into the test thinking, oh, they asked me what the max cap height is on a test plate for a butt joint. Oh, it's 1 inch or 1/8 inch. Well, no, because this says 1/16. I don't know if you guys can read that or not. So that's what this book is. It has structural, it has pipeline, and that mimics 1104, and then it has pressure piping, which is like ASME code. And the tables and charts look just like ASME, but there's different requirements for it. So that's part B.
A good point, just to interrupt you briefly, a good point is, and you made it there, but I want to camp out on it a little bit more. They're really trying to train you to navigate any code book and to not rely on your memory at all. Like, don't answer anything off the cuff because you think you know that tolerance and you're going to save time and get that answer and move on to the next answer. You really do need to look like everything up, because that's really what they're trying to tell you, is how to find answers, not no answers.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what code book you're using, because they're all slightly different.
And they have revisions. So like API, if they come out with a new edition, they have the 20th edition right now that's federally recognized. They're supposed to be coming out with the 22nd or the 23rd or something like that. They skipped over a couple of them just because whatever, the committee's decision, whatever it is. But when they come out with that, you can't rely on your knowledge of the 20th edition. You have to look at that edition. Same thing with the D11. That comes out every 5 years. So, and not only that, depending on the WPS that you certified you made up WPS, and what did you make it from? D11 2015 or D11 2020? Well, you have to have that code book in order to, know, well, are we working within the parameters of when this WPS was made? So I know we're kind of bouncing all over the place a little bit, and I didn't want to do that. But what I want to say and camp out on with part B is that part B is the hard part just because you have a fake code book that is not real. It's not used in real life is what I mean. And you have to know this code book with the test pieces that they give you. So when they come out with their, you have a lot of things on your desk. You have book of specifications. This book of specifications will have a number on it. And that number you have to write down in a bubble sheet because they're going to give you a little test box with all the little fake plastic coupons, and you're going to have to write the numbers down in that test sheet. What that means is that this book of specifications, your test booklet that asks the questions and the test pieces, the plastic test pieces, they're all going to be different than the guy sitting next to you because he's going to have a different booklet, he's going to have a different test questions, and he's going to have a different set of plastic pieces. So they want to make it so that you can't cheat. Basically, they have it's almost like in a Rubik's cube of test questions and plastic pieces. So you have those three things. You have the test coupons, the plastic ones on your desk. You have book of specifications. You have your question booklet. You have your bubble sheet for your test booklet that you have to fill out all your answers on. Then you have all your measuring tools. So you have like 5, 6 things on your desk, and you have a very small desk. So number one, you have to be organized. You have to know where all your stuff is, and you have to know that you're not making a mess of things. Because if you start, throwing your book down and it falls off the table, that's all time. And you think, oh, it's only for D1 for API 1104 was 45 or 46 questions for 2 hours. I said, oh, I'm gonna be okay with this. I got to halfway and I was right at the halfway point. I was like at 23 questions, and I was like, I better be careful because I want to be able to go back and review my questions at the end. I want to make sure that I didn't mismark anything. And you don't think you will. I got done my test. I went back. I had 3 questions that were mismarked. I was like, how did I do that? Like I went over these things so precisely. I checked it again. I checked it again. I just mismarked them. And I only got halfway through the test when I went through it the second time to make sure. And I had corrected 3. So I was hoping that I didn't have any more wrong because, that would have really put me over the edge. Thankfully, it was okay. So that's part B. There's a lot going on and you have to take that one in person. Part C is the open book test. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to mention about that. Part A and Part C are done at a Prometrics. So that's not done anymore like when Jody took the test. Jody took the test and it was everything all in one day. So you had all 3 parts of the test done in one day, which is like, I actually kind of would have rathered that because everything was fresh in my mind after going through the training. When you have it scheduled at a Prometrics, you take the part B and you can't do the other parts until you do at least do a part B. Even if you fail it, you got to do it before you go and take the other part A and part C. You take the part B and then you schedule it wherever you're close to a Prometrics and you go and you take the test. The general knowledge, you don't have any book allowed. And the part C, when I was taking the test, this was only a couple of years ago, you were allowed to bring your code book with you, all tabbed off, underlined, everything. That I was told by someone who just took it that was going away. That you're only going to be able to use the online because when you take the Prometrics and you get on the computer, there's a tab that you can click on that opens up the code book. I was told you're only going to be able to use that, and they told me that you're not going to be able to use the search bar or the find key, which that was huge for me. I used to just click Control F, and I used to punch in just one word. That's all I needed was one word. And there was 3 options. So I knew the answer was one of the 3 because everything's very specific with their wording. When you have a large paragraph of question, the one thing that you're looking for is usually a one word that they're asking for. So that's where the control find. But this is all hearsay. I don't know this for dead sure, but yeah, that's what I was told going into the part C. That's going to change.
That's interesting to know. That's interesting to know. So the gist of it, I mean, there's still 3 parts: the general knowledge, the open book code, and then the hands-on inspection. Is that still basically the way it's set up?
Yep.
Yeah, but some of these things, there's some wrinkles in there now, and there's also some things they call endorsements, which are basically are the code book that you can select to test out of. And so there's been some definite changes. One change that I did notice, like you can go, it used to be, I think anyway, it used to be that there was only one specification for the requirements to become a CWI for your experience and things like that. And now they reference another one. So there's actually two documents that you have to download to, one of them says, yeah, it's this, but you also have to look over here, and now you can go over there and look. And anyway, we'll put some links when we load this on for everybody to watch on Welder Skills. There's a free download page I did find on AWS website that has some of these things, as well as some WPS forms and pretty useful things. But they don't mind taking your money. They don't mind high failure rate. They don't mind telling you, yes, just buy these 12 books at a cost of $1,800 and study, and you'll be okay. That's crap like that is just drives you nuts. And so I would recommend, like I said, this is me way back around the 1990-91 time frame. I looked in the welding journal, and I had to look and say, okay, they're looking like these dates are offering for a seminar followed by an exam. And so I signed up and took a week, 40-hour seminar. The next day, Saturday, was the exam, and I took all three parts, and that's how that worked back then. Andrew's saying there's been some definite changes since then. Not necessarily bad changes, but not all good necessarily either, because I didn't really struggle with it. I thought it was a pretty good, it was the AWS seminar back then, but there were people in my class that complained loudly after the fact they didn't pass. And so not everybody's it's going to hit different with everybody. And any legitimate examination is going to have a fairly high failure rate. But I would highly recommend taking a course like Andrew went to. Oh, by the way, we have George here asked, what was the cost for the Lincoln course, and did the AWS course come included in that cost? I can't speak to that.
Yeah, no. So I will answer that. So the Lincoln cost was the cheapest. I did look around. I didn't look too hard just because I kind of had my mind set on the Lincoln course to begin with. Not because I worked there, just because, like I said, I had a place to stay. Everybody's situation is different. I only had 2 weeks to take off to take the course. I literally took the time off. While I was there, I was still working. So in between the breaks that we had, I was on the phone, answering emails, answering phone calls, text messages, scheduling welders, answering all kinds of questions from craziness stuff at work. I had a guy who he works under me. He went to go take his test, but he had it a little bit easier just because he doesn't have the role that I have. I'm the supervisor. He is a welder for me. Um, he did the real education program. They sent him all the stuff online. Then he went down to Georgia. He kind of took his time. He did like weeks. When I say weeks, he did weeks worth of studying, like probably a good month and a half, almost 2 months of studying before he even went and took the AWS course. And then he took the test, passed it. So if you have the time and you want to take more time so you don't have to funnel all that information, I'm just that type of person. I have to overwhelm myself. Like that's just kind of how I learn. If I take too long to do something, I just get kind of fed up and bored with it, and I end up doing worse than if I just try to throw myself into the fire. The Lincoln course was back when I took it, this was 2 years ago, it was like $500. It was very cheap. They feed you lunch. It's at their brand new weld training facility that you and I were at for the World Skills event. The real weld education, it's a lot of money. Um, I don't know enough about them. I've heard a lot of things, but I don't have firsthand experience other than the two guys that I know, three, that went through their course, and it's all word of mouth. Like, hey, these guys will get you to pass, and that's why they go. The one thing I will say about real education, not to throw anybody under the bus, is that I feel as though the people who come out of doing real education don't have the same foundation of knowledge as if you went to a Lincoln course. And the reason I say that is because if you're learning this stuff online on your own, if you're just learning to take a test to pass it, it's different from learning it to know the information and where to find it. Charlie, make sure you know where the information is and where to find it and how to look things up, what questions to ask. And I have a perfect case in point. And like I said, I'm not trying to down anybody from going to real education. I'm not trying to take money out of their pocket or anything like that. One of the guys that went and took the test works for me. He was out in the parking lot one day and he had never self-shielded flux core welded in his life, but he went and took the CWI course. So here I am thinking, all right, well, he's got a pretty good basis of knowledge after, a month and a half, almost 2 months of practicing, and then another week of the course, and then the the test and all that stuff. You would think that something would have sunk in when it came to self-shielded flux core, because we were made to read a lot. When we had homework every single night that we went through the Lincoln course, and that was two whole weeks of doing that homework every single night. So I was, there at 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 all the way until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the AWS course is 50 hours. So it was Sunday through Friday, and 10 hours a day doing that basically. Actually, yeah, it was Sunday. Yeah, it was 60 hours then, because it was 10 or no, it was something like that. It was like 50 hours. So anyways, he's out in the back parking lot. He had just bought a suitcase feeder. He's trying to weld self-shielded flux core. He just picked up the suitcase feeder. And he's telling me, he came in my office. He's like, man, this thing is running awful. I'm having a really hard time with this self-shielded flux core. It's just running just nasty. I think I got it dialed in okay, but it's just I said, yeah, it is very spattery. And I said, but what are you running? He goes, oh, I'm running a 211 MP, T11 wire. It's a self-shielded fire. I said, okay. I said, well, let me go out and see what you're working with. So we walked out there, and as soon as I walked out, I said, did you know that self-shielded flux core, like 90% of all self-shielded flux cores run on DC electronegative? He's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, you didn't learn that in your CWI course? And I didn't, I'm not disparaging. I asked the question as a real question, and he had no clue. So I went back in the office and I said, well, being a CWI, the one thing that we were always taught, and again, I might be not a good example of knowing this stuff, because I was in training, I did this stuff, I taught courses on self-shielded flux core and things like that, but I was always taught, and even in Charlie's course, he was very much about look up the information about the wire before you even have somebody strike an arc. Look up what it is, what polarities is supposed to run, all that kind of stuff. So we looked it up on Lincoln's website, and all you got to do is type in 211 MP. That's all you got to type in, and a PDF will come up, and it'll tell you exactly what the wire is. It'll tell you the AWS specification for it. It's a 71 T11 wire. It'll tell you the ISO number for it. It'll tell you what general purposes it's used for, the amperage, the voltage range, the wire speed range for different size electrodes, thickness of material, amperage ranges, polarity that it runs on, all these mechanical properties. It might even include, I'm not sure, but it might even include the chemistry of in the as welded condition. So I say all of that to say, when you go through a course like Charlie's course, he makes you kind of understand that, not just do a practice test like this. Don't just do a practice test just to get better at answering questions. He makes you look up this information so that you know. And I think most of the people that took the test understood the importance of that, not just, hey, I can get you to pass the CWI course. Again, going back to my very, very original statement when I opened up about how people are just going for their CWI course, I think that's too prevalent of they're not teaching welding with the course. They're just teaching, this is how you pass the test.
Yeah, there honestly, any major exam that there is out there, there is some training program that teaches the test, you know, whether it's A&P license for working on aircraft or passing the bar or architecture or whatever. There's somebody out there got courses that just basically teach you how to pass the test. And it sounds like I said, Charlie, the Lincoln class, he was much more than that. He really wanted you to know how to look things up. That's great. JD asked, did you plan on using your CWI to make money on the side or anything like that?
Um, I mean, I would if I had, there's a lot involved with that. And the more I'm involved with the gas industry and the legality that goes. So I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't mind testing people because I just ran a test today for the guys that work for me. I need a contractor reached out. Hey, do you have any structural welders? We didn't. But we have a WPS for it because in D11 there's pre-qualified WPSs that you can just write your own, pre-qualified procedures, I should say. So the procedure's already done. You don't have to do all the painstaking things of writing a PQR and a preliminary WPS, and you can just write a WPS under a 7018 welding and you're good to go. So I have one of those from a couple of years ago, tested the guys out on it, and everybody's good with that. I wouldn't mind going to a facility to do testing, but to take on a job it's really not like a side gig. Like I know where JD's coming from. It's like you don't really just go someplace unless you're on an assembly line and there's, 100 parts that need to be checked to make sure that they meet the quality assurance type of deal. That would be a different story, but there's really not a lot of that kind of work around for me to be checking it and then signing off on it. And you
Yeah.
kind of have that you're taking a big risk by doing that, especially if you don't have a business insurance, because if something goes wrong, the first person that they blame is the CWI. They're the first person that's got to stand up in court. They don't ask the welder, they don't ask the x-ray tech, they don't ask the NDT guys, they ask the inspector, why did you pass these welds?
Yeah.
So,
I do know someone who I would say kind of through networking kind of looked up on a sweet gig to where hundreds of welds get dropped off at his doorstep every so often, and he inspects them kind of almost on his own time frame, and then pulls out the ones that are reject and writes a little, report on why they're rejected, and then they come and pick them up. And that's cherry picking. It's kind of like, yeah, we'd all love to get that job where we
oh
just
man,
put
that would
these
be
little
awesome.
6-inch parts on a positioner and weld them all day and make tons of money too. We'd love that too. And the same thing goes with inspections. Like these are literally small bore stainless parts pipe, and stick a mirror inside, inspect the root, look at the outside. That's all there is to it. It's just totally visual inspection, but that's a rarity. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is not that. And there's always that risk. Like you said, there's always a risk of somebody sticking a microphone in your face at some point in time, and no one wants that.
And I don't discourage it because I just see that JD messaged again and he said this is not something you start out of your garage. Well, you can, and I know guys who do, and they do very well at it. But you just have to. And again, if I'm around so much all the time, and because I always have a foot in the trench and I always have a foot in the office, and I kind of have another leg, even in like stuff that's not really my business. So I kind of hear from all sides of all the things that can go wrong and all the things that happen and all the lawsuits and all the, well, who's responsible? Something like what you're talking about with the mutual friend that we have that gets those kind of jobs, yeah, that's great. But if you're going to get into that, you kind of have to be in the book all the time, knowing exactly what so a CWI's job is really to inspect and report. But more oftentimes, companies start asking you to do more, and being the type of person that I am, they do have a book, and I have it in my bag. Um, Let me grab it real quick. Hang on.
while Andrew's away, I
So-
will tell a little bit about, I met a guy, several years ago, and he was in the aerospace industry welding, but he was a CWI. And when he found out what he could make as a CWI on jobs like refineries and petrochemical and stuff like that on piping, yeah, he. But this is, again, he wasn't like a solely, he wasn't doing CWI side work. They hired him as an inspector, so he was, that takes away a lot of liability there if you're working for a company like that. But the pay was so much better than what he could make in aerospace that he did quite a bit of that. But he didn't have any idea he could make that much. And it just, when I was working on nuclear plants, I knew several welders that jumped ship from welding, went over into QC, and they had to take their CWI test, and then next thing you know, in a few weeks, you see them with a different uniform on, and they're climbing ladders and got nothing but a flashlight and a mirror on their belt, and they just looked at welds from then on, and they usually made about 20% more than the journeyman welders on the job, but it's not for everybody. We just wanted, to quote a wise man, give everybody options. Options can make you money, right? So if anybody's thinking about CWI, you need to go in eyes wide open, right?
So the two documents I wanted to share, and this is another thing that I got from Charlie, which he really harps on, and it's not like, again, I'm not touting Lincoln. I'm not touting Lincoln. I'm not saying that everybody's got to go through them, but this is some of the stuff. I'm touting Charlie because he did a really good job with the class. So there's two documents here that talk about what a CWI is. So this was QC1. You see that at the very top of the page. I don't know how well it's coming in or not. Let me do this. I was playing around with my computer here and I think I bumped something. There we go. So QC1 at the top of this page. This is the specifications for AWS certification of welding inspectors. This document, and you can get this is free on AWS's website. This document talks about what it takes to become a CWI, visual acuity test, photo requirements, how many years, how many questions per test, certifications. It tells you all that stuff. Ethics and code of responsibilities. Don't be taking bribes, that kind of stuff. 9-year certification. This is all the stuff to become a CWI. This is all the stuff you can do as a CWI. This is B5.1, if everybody can see that. So in this document, this is what tells you what you can and cannot do as a CWI. And just a quick glance of, there's a CAWI or an AWI, a WI, and an SWI, which is one's a the AWI is assistant welding inspector. They call it a CAWI, assistant certified welding inspector. Really, it's a CWI with training wheels because you didn't get your CWI. Then there's the WI, which is CWI. It tells you all the things you can do, and it's got the little X marks of things you can do, and then blanks where you can't do stuff. And then there's the senior welding inspector, and they can do everything when it comes to writing procedures and all the rest of it. And that's, again, Charlie did a really good job of explaining that, because there's a few questions on the test that ask about it. So if you were to go through a course and they just said, well, just know that this one's for, 5.1 is for, what your responsibilities are, and QC1 is how you get your CWI next. He actually printed these out. We read through them. You read through the whole thing in his class, and then you understand, oh, this is where I go to find this kind of stuff. Going back to what we were talking about, oftentimes I see that there's companies, they don't even know what welding is, and then they start asking you to do things that aren't part of your responsibilities. So that's why this document, this B5.1, is so important, to know what you actually are responsible for, because you can get yourself in hot water pretty quick if you don't.
Well, let's talk about the hands-on inspection part of the test. As you were out, you know, basically all I can remember is some plastic replicas, some basic hand tools like calipers and magnifying glass and fillet weld gauges. And they, you know, you do a little bit of hands-on measuring fillet welds, measuring surface porosity and things like that. Does that sound familiar to you, Andrew?
So yes, couple things I wanted to mention about the part B, which is the hands-on part. It's 2 hours. They have, I can actually tell you how many questions there are. It's 2 hour tests. Like I said, you have a bunch of things on your desk. It's about 5 or 6 things that are on your desk. You have your test booklet that asks you the questions. You have your book of specifications, the fake code book that I held up earlier. You have your answer booklet. You have your gauges. You have your test pieces, and there's a lot going on. One thing that you have to remember when you're taking the test is that they ask very specific questions for one specific answer. Yeah, part B practical, it says minimum number of questions is 40 and minimum percentage of correct answers is 60. So yeah, there's something about that doesn't make sense. Minimum percentage of correct answers 60. But yeah, 40 there's 40 questions when you do your part B. If you're doing D11, D 11.4 was 1104 was 46 questions. But they ask these very specific questions, and it's designed to get you on a rabbit trail. They'll ask, the first part of the question will say, in this section of the code book, of the book of specifications. So automatically you open up the code book to that section. It says this, and it requires this, and this. When you look at this part, does it meet this requirement? It's probably not a very good question to ask because I don't know the exact wording of how they would do it. But a question like that might not require you to even open the code book, even open that book of specification. Because the way that it's worded is it's only asking you about the fillet weld size or about the arc strike or about whatever that, that section of the pipe is that they're looking for, the high low, the root opening. It might not, they just throw that in there to confuse you. So what was hammered to us is that you read the question fully first before you open the book. Because if you start, and I did that even in the test, because you start getting nervous and you start falling into a rhythm. You're like, oh, I got this. And then I got to a question. I'm like, I can't find this. And I realized I had spent like 5 minutes looking for it. I was like, I have to get going. Like I'm spending too much time on this one question. I'm at question 15. It's taking me 5 minutes to find, or 10 minutes, whatever that time period was that I had given myself per question. And I said, I got to get going. So I left it, put a little X on the book next to it, and I kept going. I came back to it once I got done the test, and I went, oh, it's not even asking me what's in the code book. It's literally just asking me about the part. That's all it's asking me. It's deciphering that. And that's where going to a physical class and handling the parts gives you the advantage over somebody who just goes in and takes the test, because
Yeah.
it's that little bit of extra time you get to see the parts, to see the questions, to do some practice runs through it in order to be successful at taking the test.
Yeah, I'll just tell one thing that I remember from taking that test, and there was one question about measuring surface porosity, and one of the plastic replicas had 2 or 3 pores on it, and it said it was a multiple choice, so it's like list the total porosity. Well, I had been in some code books and from repair manuals where if you were going to talk about total surface area porosity, you had to figure out the surface area. So I was like, okay, that's a 1/8. I got to figure out pi r squared, to figure out the surface area there. And all it was adding the 3 pores up,
Right,
measure them. Okay, that was an 1/8, that was a 16th, that was a 32nd, add them up, and that was the answer. I overthought it, you
right.
know, and I don't know if it was, I could have just automatically jumped to the conclusions thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to get, get the calculator out here, or do some mental gymnastics here, but I overthought it. So that's something you can do, is overthink things, and you do need to read things through very carefully, very methodically, because it's just like working on a car. You always want to go to the simplest thing first, and don't jump to the needs a new crankshaft before you, you know,
Yeah.
oh, this is a loose, bad spark plug wire or something like
I was
that.
just about to say oh, it needs a transmission because it feels like it's bucking. Yeah, it's a bad spark plug. It's making the thing misfire.
Yeah.
That's a
So that's
common one.
that's part of it. But I'm gonna tell one little story and I've told this, I think, on the welding tips and tricks podcast that I used to do. I never really did any certifying people on the side or side contract CWI jobs. I got my CWI because I thought the weight of my job, the responsibility, just makes sense for me to have it. And then, later on, I got the senior CWI. Same, it just came out, and I thought, why not? I meet the requirements. Why not go get it? Now I'm expired, so I don't have anything. But anyway, this is a story on why I was so glad that I got it. So, Delta didn't have a certification program when I hired on there. They operated under a different, like a repair station certificate, and they operated under like qualification, not certification. And so they decided they needed to shore that up. And so there was a big bulletin came out, and they said, from this date on, you got to be certified. They gave a deadline. And so my job was to get everybody tested before that deadline. And so I was testing people like crazy, and some people didn't pass. One guy didn't pass, and he didn't really, I don't know, for some reason, he didn't think it was real, that deadline. And so he welded on something, and he pissed somebody off, and they called the hotline, FAA hotline. And next thing you know, I've got a FAA inspector, knocking on my door, my office door, wanting to see my files. And I knew what he was there for. He was, he was just beating around the bush. And then he says, let me see so-and-so's file. Here we go. Jackpot. That's the guy that I remembered. I failed. I knew what was going on. So I see this guy failed. Yep, he failed. And anyway, he said, okay, one more question. What qualifies you to qualify these welders? And I had passed and taken it already, and I said, well, I'm a certified welding inspector with the American Welding Society. Okay, that's all. And he handed me my files. Never heard from the guy again. My balls came back out of my body and hung like they're supposed to after that.
Yeah.
But worth it. That one little situation right there. And that's kind of why I got it. I thought things might come into question one day on what gives me the authority to do this, and the company, you could say there's some provisions the company can designate somebody, but man, there's nothing like having the real thing. So I like you did, I paid for it out of my own pocket. I took my own vacation time and did it because Delta didn't even apparently didn't even think I needed it at the time, but I thought I did. So I'm was never sorry ever that I did it, because I learned a lot and just studying to get it and everything. And, it's something nobody could take away from me. And it gave me options that I could have pursued. And it gave me a lot of clout in the position that I was in. And I could speak when I would go into a meeting where anything was called into question. I was speaking from a point of authority and not, I think that, I don't know,
And that's kind of my take on, there's so much talk. I mean, this is a whole nother conversation, but this very, very good segue into this. There's so much talk, and I have even been guilty of it. You don't need a degree. A degree doesn't mean anything in the field. There's a bunch of people getting degrees, they get into debt, all that stuff. And I agree with that. There's truth to that. I was even in that mindset when I had called you for the first time and I said, I have a $40,000 scholarship and I don't want to go to school. I don't want to use it. Like it's put such a bad taste in my mouth. And you were one of the ones that encouraged me to go and get it. You were like, well, you can get it online. As long as you have the degree, nobody's going to ask you where you got it from. Nobody's going to ask you what your GPA was, what you got it in. You get it in basket weaving, but you have a bachelor's degree and you have proof. I'm glad I got it. That's probably been one of the biggest things I've gotten because it gives you that point of authority. The business degree that I got, it was a bachelor's degree. I did it in 3.5 years. Had a $40,000 scholarship from when I was competing at World Skills. That was a Miller thing that they had given since back in the 90s. They started giving that. That coupled with that really taught me how the corporate mind works and how business really works. It didn't teach me like, I have a business degree. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be the best business owner in the world. Like I should just go start a business and I'd be successful at it. But it taught me how people think and it taught me how to communicate really well. The CWI gave me that point of authority of, okay, I have this certification that says, you know, I at least know how to navigate a code book. I know how to argue a policy that they have. I'm a welder, so I kind of have the trifecta of what you need to be kind of competing in today's job market because there's so many people out there with CWI or something after their name. There's so many people with a degree and they might have both the CWI and a degree, but they don't know how to weld. And there's so many people that maybe they were welders at one point and they have a CWI, but they don't have wherever you want to, throw the Rubik's Cube and jumble it up. I have all three and I can speak intelligently on all three. So when I step and I have to oftentimes step into a meeting and they ask me a specific question and I have to have an answer for it. And that what you just said, I've been into so many of those situations. I just had a guy, this guy was an asshole. He was a is a CWI. I don't think he has any welding experience. He was arguing with me. Well, he was being kind of abrasive with me about what the preheat was on this certain pipe that we were welding not too long ago. And it was a cold day. It was like 10 degrees out. And he asked me what we were preheating to. I told him what the temperature was, and he said no. And he tried arguing with me on it, and he told me I said 225, he said 300. I said, okay, open the policy and show me. He opened it up, and there were three tiers of where to heat the pipe at, and it was off of the yield of the pipe. So in API, it's X52, X60, X65. Well, all the way up to X60 was 225, 225 degrees. From X60 to X65, it was 300, and then from uh, X65 to above or above X65 was 450 degrees. So he said, I wanted it 300. I said, well, you can't make up those rules. I said, it says X52 on the pipe. We know what the grade of pipe is. I'm heating it to 225. And he didn't like that very much, but I knew what I was talking about. And then there was another on that same job on that same day. He asked me something about I asked him if his calibration, if his UT gauge, his ultrasound gauge was calibrated because I had already ultrasound the pipe and it was a certain number. He ultrasounded it and it was a different number. I said, "Is that calibrated?" And he goes, "Are you AS&T level 2?" I said, "Actually, I am because when you become a CWI, you're automatically AS&T level 2." He didn't like that either. So I get into a lot of those situations, and I'm not trying to throw it
That's,
in his face. I'm not trying to be a dick, but you have to argue with people sometimes because they make their own rules.
oh yeah. Before we get off, we have to bash a little bit. I don't mean that. I don't mean bash, but I'll tell you, if I was in charge of the rules on the criteria for CWI, I would have to take a hard, long look at what they got there. Because I just, my whole welding career, and I was, from the time that I started on my first power plant, we had CWIs that had no welding background, that drove a bread truck or something and maybe worked for a few months at a welding supply store or something like that. They barely met the criteria, and it showed, and I don't think that's a good idea at all. And I think that if I'm sure their reasoning for it is that, it just opens up the field. Otherwise, we wouldn't have enough CWIs. Well, people would figure out a way to get more CWIs that had actual welding experience if they required it. I'm sure of, and I think they should. I just don't think there's any I don't think there's any. I mean, if you took a look at any other skill, you know, like, well, it's like playing guitar. You're gonna be a guitar teacher if you can't play guitar. How are you gonna do that? You know,
Right.
I just, not that they're a teacher, but I mean, good gosh, it's just, we've all seen it. You and I have seen it. We've seen CWIs that were they didn't know what they're talking about a lot of times.
Most of the time.
Yeah, so I hate that, but I can't change it. All right, let's see. We got to answer a few questions here.
Yep. I just sent an answer to George.
Okay.
JD told me to be careful bragging about a third leg.
Uh, yeah,
JD.
yeah. Has anybody got any more questions that we might be able to field here before we shut her down? Um, again, we'll try to put the link. There's a download page that I found on the aws.org site that's got all that. It's got the QC1 as well as that other document that Andrew showed that's got the requirements to become a CWI as well as the responsibilities. Those are two different documents. And actually that page has a lot of sample WPSs and PQRs and things like that. I didn't know that page was there until I was doing a little pecking around for this call. So it's kind of a valuable resource, and we'll post that when we make this live for everybody viewing on welder skills. George said you can't see the answer. Let's see what website. Okay, well, maybe he just needs to refresh or something. It's
Yeah.
Lincoln Electric education training programs, corporate, uh, I think he'll find it.
Yeah, if you just type in literally for George, literally if you just type in Lincoln Electric CWI seminar, it comes right up because it's the training programs and workshops or seminars and workshops. If you just type in
Yeah,
Lincoln Electric seminars and workshops, it'll come right up and you'll be able to find that under
yeah. The bad
CWI.
thing is, I tell you, I'll just throw my 2 cents in worth here, because back when I took my 40-hour course, it was probably around $1,300 to $1,500 back in that 30 years ago or more, And if you can go to something like that for 500-ish, that's a bargain. Yeah, and not to mention that, don't discount the networking of the people you might meet when you're in a class like that.
Yeah, so I can actually tell you what the seminar cost or the CWI course costs. Let's see here. Design welding structures, design welding structures. Why is this telling me design welding structures? I want CWI. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. CWI training, register now. Beyond the booth. Hmm. It's not showing CWI anymore. I don't know if they might not be doing it. I don't know. I'm not seeing it. That's interesting. All I'm seeing is design welding connections, steel structures. Beyond the booth, that's the classroom instruction for teaching people how to teach classes. And then there's design welding connections. I'm not seeing the CWI. I don't know if they have. Also, Hobart, if I should mention that, Hobart also has a um CWI course you can take.
Yeah, Hobart's got one. I think they might. I know they have a 2-week program. They might have a 1 week also, or they might have one or the other. Theirs is most likely fairly affordable as well. But bottom line is, I think it's worth it to go to a training like that rather than try to wing it uh, or try to do it online. And you're bound to meet somebody whose acquaintance benefits you at some point down the line in your career too. So that's something not to discount. All right, Andrew.
All right.
Good
Hopefully.
talk. Good talk.
Yeah,
Thanks for giving us your time here.
absolutely. Anything to help out.
We'll hopefully have you back on and talk about actual welding sometime.
Anytime you want.
All right, buddy.
All
All
right.
right.
Well, you guys have a good night.
All right, everybody. We're shutting her down.